Hello and welcome back to the MyClayCo studio. My name is Carla and today we're going to be going through baked goods. So I have 3 different baked goods that we'll be going through today. The first one is my absolute favorite pastry in the whole world, and that is croissants. So we'll be going through how to make a 3D croissant form and then how to add a couple of little details to that just to make it a little bit more realistic. The second one is a sweet scroll. So I'm going to be making cinnamon scrolls today and just going through how to make some icing to drizzle on top of that as well. The last one, a little bit controversial, is donuts. I know they're usually fried, not baked, but I'm putting them in baked goods today because sometimes you can get away with baking them. Fried are obviously more delicious. So I'm going to show you how to make the form of a donut, how to then create icing to be able to ice those, and then what to do for a couple of embellishments on top of that. We have a lot to do today, so let's get into it. So the first treat that we're getting into today are our donuts. I've laid everything out that we will need to make our donuts. This is a group of must-haves and like-to-haves for donut making. My initial one though is of course your clay for the donuts. I always like to use Ecru for donuts and all of my baked goods because it's just a good base clay color for unbaked goods. I then add that kind of toasty baked look with pastels. You could use mica powders, although they do have a slight shimmer to them, whereas these ones are matte. So I have these along with a brush to be able to brush that on. To actually form the donut, you will need an acrylic clay press or some other kind of flat small object that you can press with, and this tool. So this one is, in my opinion, super important for donut making. It's kind of a cone shaped tool you can see here, and this is going to be making our donut hole. So this one is a must-have in my opinion. The other nice to haves are the brush tool. This will just add a little bit of texture so it's not completely smooth. Washi tape so we can do some exclusion to make it look a little bit more baked, and then my embellishments. So I've got some liquid clay to do the icing, I've got glazes to glaze them after, and I've got a couple of sprinkles that I made yesterday that we can pop on top. So I've got my Ecru clay, I've just rolled it into a little ball. If you are making a pair or multiple donuts, I like to have a little jewelry scale and just weigh out my piece. So 3.07 grams. If I'm making a pair, I might just get the same amount of clay. So let's take a bit off. And a little bit more, a little bit less. Okay, that's good enough. So that would be my even pair of clay. It's not a requirement. You can eyeball it. I just find it's a little bit more accurate if I'm making a pair. So all we do is we have our ball. You can just roll it in your hands to make that very circular kind of shape. And then we're going to take our acrylic clay press and we're just going to press down on this one. Acrylic clay presses are great because it's got a little dot in the center so you can kind of see where the center is, and we're just pressing down. I like to go till this middle circle. You can use just a flat tile for this, that's completely fine. Again, you can just eyeball it. If I'm making multiples, I like to just be a little bit more precise. So I'm just going to soften those edges just by pressing down lightly with my thumb. You can already see that it's starting to take the shape of, it could be either a donut or you can use this same technique to make bagels. Completely up to you. All right, so I've got my softened edges. I'm now going to take my cone, which is this one, and I just find the center. And all I do is I just swivel that cone all the way until I can feel the tile down the bottom. So I've already got a donut hole and I can see the hole in the center. I now flip it over. So now that hole is my guide. I do the same thing on this side. I just spin, spin, spin. Smooth it so that it's a nice smooth hole. And as you can see, both sides are now a perfect little donut hole. So generally donut holes are quite small on the donut form. You can use a cutter to cut this out and then smooth around the edges. I've just found that this tool does it in a matter of seconds. So if you've got one of these, perfect for this purpose. The next thing we're going to be doing is actually coloring our donut so that it looks like it's been fried. So you'll notice with donuts that around the belly, they've actually got a line that is not fried. That's because you fry it on one side and then you flip it and it fries on the other side, and there's kind of a belly band of, it looks a little bit unbaked. So that's what we're going to be replicating with this washi tape. So I really like this washi tape. It's in the, I think it's in the Floral Lane set from the washi tape shop. It's actually in 2 colors. So you can see a perfect line down the center for us to cut down. So I'm just going to tear a bit off of this, stick it down on my tile, and then all I need to do is take my craft knife and just run along where the colors kind of meet so that I'm getting a straight line. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect, I just want to try and get it as perfect as possible. And then all I do is take one of those lines off. You can see it's not completely straight, but it'll do the job for what we need to do. Okay, now that I've got my exclusion strip, all I'm going to do is run it around the center of my donut. So this is why I like using washi tape, because it actually sticks to it. I have tried using alfoil, but it can be a little bit annoying. I'm just going to trim that bit. Yeah, I've used alfoil in the past and it has been a bit annoying to actually get on my piece. So when I thought to use washi tape, it definitely changed how easy it was to create that effect on donuts. Okay, so I've got that bit now. And I'm just going to put it on. If you've got excess, you can either rip it off or you can just continue it around. I'm just going to continue it around to make it nice and easy. And that is our exclusion belly band. Now I'm just going to texture it lightly. So I'm taking the bristle and I'm just going to be texturing that outside. And all this does is it makes it a little bit more realistic, because baked and fried goods are not perfectly smooth. So just adding a little bit of texture. I'm just going to add it on the bottom as well. I don't need to add it on the top because we're going to ice it anyway. So I'll just leave that. But now that we've got the texturing done, it means that we can actually start to color. So I get my pastels here. I generally like to go in first with a yellow and then a very light, this is kind of the NuPastel brown is kind of a reddy brown. So it's really good instead of using this like neon orange. I like to use this one for baked goods. It gives a really good effect. So I just take my craft blade, scrape a bit of the yellow off. This just is a good undercoat. The more kind of detailing that you can do, so like adding double layers of colors, it just adds a little bit more depth to your pieces. So I'm going to go in with that yellow. It might not be super noticeable, but I can definitely tell in real life. I want to go the opposite way to where my tape is, because I don't want that tape peeling off. So I'm just adding that yellow underneath as well. It's just going to give it a nice golden undertone for when we add that kind of brown baked color. Okay, so we've done that one. Now we move on to this nice reddy brown. So get a bit of that. Now, You don't want to just dip in and then go straight onto your piece because you might get a really dark spot. So generally when I start loading up my brush, I get a bit and then I actually use my hand to dab a bit off. And you can see now I'm just getting a really light toasty effect on my donut. Once you start working it in, you can kind of tell how much is loaded on your brush, and then you might not have to dab it as much. But we're at least making sure we're just not loading our brush up too much. We want to do the underside. Just give it a nice little swirl. And we don't really need to do the top because we're going to ice it, but I'll just, for continuation's sake, put a little bit on the top. You could make this an original glazed and just put a nice like Sculpey glaze on after. You want to make sure that you get it in the center as well, but that is a nice toasty donut. So all we're going to be doing now is just removing that belly band, and you can now see it looks like a donut would. So all we have to do in this center part is there is kind of an indent. So you can leave it as is, or you can just add that extra bit of detailing. I'm just going in with the back of a craft knife. You can also use a needle tool or a toothpick even if you've got one at home. And it's a very minute detail, but it's one that I do like to add in, is just a slight indent in the center of that belly band. Okay, that's done now. You can see it's really starting to take on the form and all those little details of a donut. Okay, so now that we've got all of that done, all that's left to do is the icing. So you can just put a straight liquid Sculpey or any other liquid clay onto this. I have found that the fuchsia makes quite a nice like dark pink icing. I've actually made up a pink icing here just by using white liquid clay and then adding in a little bit of pigment powder just so that it's this kind of like nice strawberry color. So that's really easy. It's just whatever color you want. You can either pick straight off the shelf or you can mix white with some other kind of color. So to put the icing on, I'm just actually going to use a silicone tool. I didn't have that at the start in my tools that I would be using, but it is one that I should have had. So all I do is I pick up my icing and I just kind of paint it on the top. So you can do this either by holding it or you can just leave it on your tile. I generally get the majority on holding it and then I'll move it over to my tile to finesse the details. If you get a little bit of an icing drizzle down the side, that's completely fine because you know what? You sometimes get those in real life too. That's the best thing about doing things like baked goods is they are handmade in real life, so they have imperfections. And that's exactly what sometimes happens in clay as well. So embrace those imperfections. It lets people know that they were handmade with love. And you know what? They look delicious either way. So that is my donut fully iced. I think it looks pretty good as is, but I am going to just add a couple of sprinkles to the top of it. So as I said earlier on in the video, I did actually make up some sprinkles yesterday. These were just cut with a micro circle cutter tool out of varying different colors of clay, and then I just baked them. You can also do the long sprinkles just by extruding really thin clay and then chopping them up after they're baked. But I just did these ones with a micro circle cutter tool. All I'm going to be doing is grabbing some of those sprinkles and sprinkling them on. You can also do this with caviar beads. So we actually stock some caviar beads that are not just the metallic ones. We have ones that are kind of in pastel or macaron type colors. So they're really, really cute when you put them on donuts. So really it's anything that you can kind of think of that would be cute on a donut, you can put on the top of your clay donuts. So I might just put one more sprinkle over this side. And I think I'm going to call that done. Okay, so next on the list we've got our croissants. So again, we're starting with our Ecru clay. I've just burnished it to my tile, and I have got one of our croissant cutters. If you don't have a croissant cutter, that's completely fine. You can just kind of hand cut this triangular type shape. I do like to have our cutter just so that they're more uniform, just like with weighing out the weights of the donuts. It just means that I can get the exact same size and shape every time. So all I do is I cut out from my clay. I've got my clay at about 1.5 mils thick. The thicker that you roll out your clay for this one, the more like cartoony, chibi type style you'll get. And thinner, you'll get more realistic, but it will be much smaller. So I've kind of gone in between the two. So let's get into this one. So all I do once I've cut it out is I just remove it from my tile, and I'm just going to clean up the edges before I start. So just making sure I'm getting rid of any of those like little clay balls. So you'll notice that our clay cutter has a little cutout here at the bottom. If you've ever made croissants in real life, like I have, you will know that you cut the bottom so that you can kind of control how much these fan out. So if you wanted to have a really tight croissant, you would keep them as is, or even potentially push it in further. If you did want to have something that has a wider crescent shape, you could actually pull these out further. Even if it rips your croissant clay a little bit in the middle, it doesn't even matter, because that's going to be in the center of your croissant. So it's just there just so that you can control how far you want that crescent shape out. Okay, so now that I've got my shape, this is where I'm going to add some of my detailing. So one of the things that you'll notice with croissants is they've got lots and lots of layers. So one of the easiest ways to add layers is either to take your tissue blade and just run along those edges. It doesn't have to be perfect. We're just going to run the blade along, and we're just going to press in with that blade. Kind of like when we're making books to create kind of pages, we're doing this with our croissant just to create layers. This is an optional step. It just, in my opinion, adds that level of realism to it. So as you can see now, I've got lots of pastry layers, and I'm just going to do that on both sides of my croissant. Okay, now that I've got sufficient layers in my croissant, I can now put it down to be able to roll. So before I'm going to roll, I am going to kind of bring those layers into the top as well, which I could use my tissue blade again to press in. I do find though that this sculpting tool is great for adding layers. I like to scrape up. If you scrape down, sometimes it can take this with it. It's just easier, in my opinion, to go from the largest base up to the smallest point. And all we're doing is scraping that. And then again, you'll have all of these like little clay balls, and you just brush over with your finger to get rid of those. What this is going to do though is it creates those really nice flaky layers on top, adding that extra layer of realism to your piece. Also just means though that when we're colouring it to make it look baked, it means that you're going to get a lot of depth, because you're going to have in the indents, you're going to have this lighter colour and then the darker colour on top, like you would if you, say, egg washed your baked good. Okay, now that we've got that done, we can get to rolling. Obviously, we want this to be on the outside, the texturing, not the inside. So I'm just going to pick it up, make sure my tile is nice and clean, and then I'm going to flip it over. This just means that when we're rolling it, we're going to get that nice texturing on the outside. So all I do is I start to fold these guys in. And now you can see what I mean by you can control how fanned out you want your crescent. I want it to be a little bit fanned out. So that's going to be my final size, I guess, of my croissant. And all I do is I roll up the center. Okay, so I've got my little croissant guy here. As you can see, he's got kind of this lip at the front. Depending on where you want that, sometimes a baked good might be that way, sometimes it's further down. I like to have mine just sitting up from level, and then I'm just going to kind of pull those in so that it's a little bit more crescent shaped. And as you can see, we've got all that beautiful texturing still on our croissant. If you have touched it with your fingers, you can add in a little bit more of that detailing. But as you can see, we now have detailing in the layers of our croissant and also on the top of our croissant. So this is the moment you want to take to clean up any of your edges, get any of those kind of stray bits of clay. No, don't do what I do and just poked it. It's all right, we'll just cover it up. And there we go, we've got an adorable little croissant shape. So now all we want to do is shade it so that it looks like it's been baking. To do that, I don't go in with the yellow on this one because it's not kind of fried like the donut is. Definitely more crispy baked. So I just take my, again, that kind of orangey reddy tone brown. And let's see how much of this we're going to put on. So again, just using my hand to make sure I'm not putting too much on. And I tend to go just on the top of the croissant. I don't really want to go in these side parts, because if you look at a croissant, it doesn't really have it in those areas, and if it does, it's only a really little amount. If you do get a dab like I did off of my finger there, you can just take a wet baby wipe and just take some of that off and then continue. As you can see, it's a really nice toasty golden brown croissant colour that I've got from those NuPastels. And on the base, I just want to make sure that I'm leaving a little bit of a gap of that colour, because the base gets really toasty. So I want to have that differentiation between the bottom of the croissant and the top of the croissant, because this is where it baked flat. So it just means that you're getting that really beautiful gradient. Ugh, looks good enough to eat. So yeah, getting that beautiful gradient, kind of like with the donut, you just want to exclude some of the parts just to make sure that you're getting a little bit more of that realistic look. And that is a cute little croissant. Make sure that you are happy with the shape before you bake it, because obviously once it's baked, it's done. And that one is all good. So as I said at the start of the video, if you did want to add embellishments to the top of your croissant, you can do it either before it's baked or after baking. It doesn't really matter. I like to do it after baking just so that my pigment powders don't move about. So all I have to do is get some Bacon Bond or oven bake clay adhesive And I'm going to add almond slivers to the top of mine. So to make the almond slivers, all I did was I pre-baked a piece of extruded clay in a kind of slightly butter yellow color, and then I just cut it into little almond slices by slicing on an angle. And you get really cute thin almond slices. You can do a big batch. If you're having a creative blank day, you can actually do a whole batch of this just while you're sitting watching TV, and you have either sprinkles or almond flakes, whatever you want as embellishment to your baked goods, and they're ready to go. So I just get a bit of my bacon bond just wherever I kind of want the almonds to go. I'm going to just smooth a very thin layer on. I think I'm just going to put it on the kind of 3 tiers. And then just to make sure that I don't have too much, I'm just going to smooth it with my finger. I just want enough so that it'll adhere those little almond flakes, and then take any excess off. Okay, so now you can kind of sprinkle those almond flakes on top. I just kind of pick them up with my finger. And then much like the sprinkles, once we have them on, we can then reposition any almond flakes so that we make sure that they're in the best spot for us. And then once you're done, that can just go back in the oven to bake those pieces together. And the last baked good that we're going to cover today are cinnamon rolls or sweet scrolls. So we do actually have a cutter for this one as well. But as I said with the croissant, you can actually just cut this size out. So I like to have a tapered kind of roll so that this larger part is going to be on the inside of the scroll and then the smaller part on the outside. This just means that you're going to get that nice like raised top in your scroll. So there are 2 ways that you can do this. You can either get your clay and put, say, a liquid clay on the inside and then roll it. It can get a little bit messy. Or you can actually get a really, really thin layer of clay, and this is actually going to be what we will use for kind of that cinnamon inside. So I'm just going to lay that down, and then I've got this one, it's probably about 1.5 mil thick, and I'm just going to pop it on top. I'm just going to gently roll that one. The reason I'm putting the filling down underneath is because I actually want to put a little bit of Glad wrap over the top of this one. I've just torn off a little bit of Glad wrap here, just so that we can get a little bit of a domed effect to our cinnamon roll. So I just make sure that I've got that nice and tight on there. I take my cutter. This is the other reason why you can't really do it with a craft knife to get this nice domed effect that you could get with your cinnamon scroll. So I do prefer to use the cutter, but not to say that you couldn't do it with a craft blade if you wanted to. So now that I've cut that off, all I do is grab my tissue blade and shave that one up, taking off all those little flyaway bits. And then I've got my cinnamon roll. So I start with the thickest part outside on the inside, and all I'm going to be doing is rolling it. You want to make sure that it's got a flat bottom. So sometimes I do put it down to roll it once I've got it. So I just want to make sure that that center bit is really nice and tight. And then I press it down, and all I'm going to be doing is swirling that around. So that is my basic kind of cinnamon roll shape. Now when you cut with the cutter, it does kind of put some of the clay over that icing. So all you need to do is kind of almost like chip away some of that clay, and this actually also gives you that kind of textured filling effect. Okay, once I have that done, I'm then going to use my bristle tool again and just texture the outside. If you have any flyaway bits of clay here, just clean it up so it doesn't get baked on there. You don't have to it doesn't matter if it indents at all, because we've got that nice scraggly texture all around the cinnamon roll. All right, this part here, you just want to make sure that it's flattened down on the side like a real cinnamon roll would be. And that is your basic form of a cinnamon roll. So all we're going to be doing now is using our NuPastels, again getting that brown colour out, and we're going to be making the outside look nice and toasty baked. Now I actually like cinnamon rolls to be pretty toasty because we're going to be putting a kind of like clear white icing over the top of it. So we really want that kind of darker colour to really shine through. So I go quite heavy with this brown colour so that it's really nice and toasty. And then we have a nice beautiful toasty cinnamon roll. You can see it's got my fingerprint right there. So I'm just going to go over it again with that bristle so it's no longer there. Okay, let's get on to the icing. So I've got my clear liquid clay in there, and I'm just adding the tiniest little bit of white. If you wanted to, you could pre-bake some of this and see how transparent it's going to be. I generally just eyeball it, but you could also, if you're making these on the regular, you could always weigh them. So I'm just putting a little dab of white into that clear, and then I want to make sure that I'm mixing it really well. I want it to be mainly transparent and a little bit of white in it. I also usually use white silicone mixing bowls, but if I'm making a white or clear liquid clay, I generally will pull out either my purple or my blue ones just so that I can really see that colour. Okay, I think that's going to be pretty good. So now all I do is I pull my little cinnamon roll in and I'm just going to ice it. So to ice it, all I do is I get a bit of this and I kind of blob and drizzle. So this definitely you can put a softener or thinner in it too if you want it really, really drippy. I kind of like it a bit thicker so I can control where it's going to go. Now that I've got majority on, I'm actually going to switch to a silicone head just so that I don't run the risk of using that metal on my cinnamon roll and deforming my beautiful, beautiful cinnamon roll shape. So as you can see, it's kind of a really nice clear color already. It's going to get even more translucent when we bake it. So just making sure I'm just putting a bit on this. We're going to glaze all of our baked items at the end anyway, so we can get a really nice shine from the glaze at the end. They look really nice and shiny when they're wet, but they do kind of go a little bit more matte after they're baked. Okay, I'm pretty happy with how kind of rustic that drizzle is. So that one is ready to get baked. Okay, you can see we've got all of our baked goods out of the oven and they look amazing. So now all we have to do is finish them off with a glaze. So this is just to get that really nice shiny outside. So I'm going to use a Sculpey gloss glaze. Open that one up, just take a brush and we're just going to lightly brush these ones. Start with my cinnamon roll. It doesn't really need a lot because it's got that icing on the top of it. Just putting a bit of glaze on. You can see the glaze now shimmering on that one. Same with the croissants and donut. It's just getting that really nice shine on them. We really like to use the Sculpey glazes because they're air dry. You brush them on and then within 10 minutes they're completely dry. And they just give this beautiful, beautiful shine. Tegan did a video on sealants the other week and there wasn't much difference between the glaze and the varnish. So the fact that you don't have to rebake it after you've put it on is a bonus. I'm going to be very gentle with my almond one just because it has got those almond flakes. I don't want to accidentally knock any of them off. Now almond croissants generally have a icing sugar on it, so you could put a kind of icing sugar or some other kind of icing on top of these, but I'm just going to leave them as is. They'll be nice and glazed. Make sure I'm getting the little tail ends of those as well. And lastly, a beautiful donut. It's very, very cute. Again, this has little chunks on it, but they're properly baked in to that liquid Sculpey. So I don't have to be too careful, but I just want to make sure that I'm not leaving any big blobs of glaze anywhere. Might just do a little bit around the outside as well, just to make it really nice and shiny. And there we have it. They are all finished and glazed and looking beautiful. We hope you've enjoyed the video today and you can now incorporate some 3D techniques of baked goods into your creations. If you found the video useful, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and we'll see you next time.